Thank you. And so I was thrilled at Blanche. I thought that was wonderful. And then all of a sudden somebody said, well, no, it was Jay Sandrich in his genius. He said, if Betty plays another, Man Hungry, they're going to think it's Sue Ann revisited. So let's make her Rose. Well, I didn't know who Rose was. And then they went out and got a real neighborhood nymphomaniac to play But Susan said, well, Rose is somebody I like a lot. She's kind of a character that I really love. And Jay just put it in a capsule. He said, she never is sarcastic. She takes every word for the exact meaning of that word. She doesn't have any imagination. If you said I could eat a horse, she'd call the SPCA. It was one of those things. So I was thrilled to wind up with, and then this one took Blanche out into orbit where I never would have had the guts to go.
Rue, did you see the possibilities of Blanche immediately when you read the pilot?
When I read the pilot, I called my agent and I said, I knew this was a hit the minute it was delivered to my door. I could tell before I opened it. I just knew it. And then when I read it, I said, oh, I'm perfect for the role of Blanche. She said, well, they have Betty White in mind for that role. They want you to read Rose.
And she said, Betty who?
That's what I did. Yes. And I said, oh, well, I don't really have a handle on Rose, but I'll go do it. I want to be a part of this. So I was reading Rose for Jay Sandrich, obviously without my handle. And he said, I'm going to ask you to do something unorthodox. Will you go down the hallway and just look at the role of Blanche? I said, well, surely if I have to. So I came back very quickly, and he said, let me hear you read it, and I did. And then he said, thank you very much, and that was that. Then I was called in again, and this time Betty White was there. And she didn't have a clue yet about Blanche versus Rose. And he said, now, Rue, I'd like you to read Blanche, and Betty, I'd like you to read Rose. And she said, oh, okay. And they heard us read. He heard us read. They heard us read. And the next thing I know, I'm getting called by Susan Harris saying, is there anything you can do to get B. Arthur to do this show? Because we'd worked together on Maude. And I said, oh, I've been wanting to work with her again. I'll give her a call. I called B. And I said, what is the matter with you? This is the best script you're ever going to read. And she said, Rue. I'm not interested in doing Maude and Vivian meet Sue Ann Niven. I said, no, it's the other way around. I'm playing the vamp. Betty's playing the nitwit. She said, oh, no, that's very interesting. The next thing I know, the three of us have been called in to read for network. And we wowed them. Oh, what a happy day. What a happy day that was.
Oh, wasn't it? The fun of it was sitting around the table, where you read around the table with a lot of actors, and all of a sudden I'm sitting there with Rue and B, and you had to be very careful. When you'd read a line, you better be ready. You threw it over the net, and you better be ready because you were going to get it right back. That was the most exciting read-through I've ever sat through in my life.
Really?
Yes.
Because we were so good?
I was.
You got to have a good straight guy.
Terry, as the director, you talk about the pilot, how it's at a tempo.
He's our fifth Golden Girl.
Would you elaborate on that, please? Might be a lot of confusion around here.
We would not have this same show if we didn't have our fifth Golden Girl.
Thank you very much.
Every week. We only got him for 4 years.
We love her. Actually, I'm glad to have the opportunity to talk about the pilot because when I was living in London, I'd watch American television, I'd watch Mary Tyler Moore, and especially soap. I noticed the work of a certain person, and I said, God, if I had the opportunity to have that kind of material and those kind of actors, I'd like to think that's how I would do it. And I would check the credits all the time, and it was always the work of Jay Sandrich. And Jay did that pilot, which we saw, and he set a template, he set a rhythm and a pace and a dynamic, which I was very fortunate to be able to emulate. And I owe him a great debt of gratitude, and probably a great deal of money, but I'll settle for the gratitude. So that's my response to seeing that pilot again. It was exactly what I used to watch and like so much.
But Jay Sandrich told me, I don't want to hear a Southern accent. And I said, but Susan Harris wrote this character to be more Blanche than Blanche Dubois. And he said, well, I don't want to hear a Southern accent. So I tried doing it with kind of a modified sort of Southern accent. And then when we got picked up, I remember being in your office, and I'd been thinking about how to play her and not play her Southern. And I thought, okay, so back in July, this was in March, I guess, that we did the pilot. In July, we got picked up, and I went in and I talked to, I guess it was you and Tony Thomas. And I said, okay, guys, I know I'm not supposed to do this with a Southern accent. I've got an idea. How about Mae West? And I remember you said, not do it with a Southern accent? Of course I want you to do it with a Southern accent. I said, oh, thank God, because I don't really know how to play it without a Southern accent.
So
and even a phone...
May Southwest.
So Jay Sandridge wasn't perfect, but he was really good.
Listen,
He wanted Betty to do it with a Dutch accent. She was crazy.
Now, the question is, how did it get on the air? Obviously, it was the family had never been seen on television before. What was your negotiation with NBC that led to the pilot?
Tony and I had taken a meeting with another writer on another concept altogether, which we thought was terrific, and they didn't. And they being Warren Littlefield and Perry Simon, and they said, we had our affiliates convention in Miami, and Selma Diamond and one of the other actresses on one of their series did this thing where they thought Miami Vice was Miami Nice. Doris Roberts. It was Miami Nice, and it was very funny. Is there anything about like retired people in Miami? And the writer we were with said, well, I'm not interested in writing old women. He's been out of the business a long time. And I said, I know someone really well who could just knock this out of the park. And that's how it started.
And in terms of casting, was Estelle Getty in the mix in the beginning, or did you?
she was the first one hired.
We hadn't seen anyone that came close, and we had a lot of fabulous candidates for. No, we were pretty much decided on who we wanted for the other parts. I think the B. Arthur part was described in the script as a B. Arthur type pilot script. So we were very concerned, and Tony called from New York and said, "I found her. I'm bringing her out," and. A couple of days later, this little package walked into our offices, and it was done.
Perfect person.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Really perfect.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Had you ever worked with her before, Betty or Rue?
What, dear?
Estelle Getty, had you ever worked with her before?
No, I didn't. And matter of fact, being a California type, and I don't get to New York that often, I had not even seen her in Torchstone Trilogy, which was her big hit on Broadway. Had you ever? Yes, yes.
I saw Torch Song in Los Angeles after she'd been touring for 4 years in it. And of course, she had that part nailed. And I thought she brought the show to life. She really made it work for me. Only was in the third act. So when they cast her as Sophia, I thought they saw Torch Song Trilogy. They saw what I saw, and that's what I believed all these years. I didn't know.
Well, just go on believing it. It's a great story.
I've even told that.
It's never stopped her before. You know, whatever sounds good, she tells it as fact.
You see why we never had to write?
Oh, people think we just made those words up, Susan.
James alluded to the one character in the pilot, Coco the cook. Was he going to be a regular person? What happened to his role?
We didn't know what gold we had found with these ladies, and there was just no room for him. It was hard enough in the 23 minutes we had every week to tell a story and give them material. And I mean, we just had a wealth of riches, and we didn't want to deprive him, and so we cut him out for that reason. It wasn't fair. He was a good actor.
Oh, and it was heartbreaking because, you know, when you sweat out a pilot and you're so thrilled, and I think he was more as excited as all the rest of us, and then to discover that the part had been cut had to be, I had such guilt feelings about it, but so much of our interaction took place at that kitchen table, and it would have been altogether different had he been there. But to this day, there are people who see the pilot for the first time and say, was it because he was gay? So I always say he wasn't gay. Well, it gets into very complicated stuff, you know.
If
and then
you were
along
gay,
came
would he still-
Brokeback Mountain, so I don't have to explain anything.
Well, you know, we just didn't need two cooks. And obviously, Sophia was going to be the Italian cook. It was obvious after she'd been hired and we all started working together that I think the network saw that too. Don't need two cooks.
That didn't make him feel any better.
No. Hey, that's the business.
Now I'd like to ask our writers, when did you join?
We were lucky. We got on, much later. All of us came out on the 5th season, so we're just here really to pay homage. I just came here to get my pictures taken with the girls again. What we learned, Mitch and I talk about this all the time, is most shows. It was my first real big, sitcom, and most people, when you start writing on a sitcom, sitcom, it really isn't all that funny sometimes. But you kind of muddle on. If you could not write a joke, if B. Arthur or Betty or Rue could not get a laugh with your joke, you have written a bad joke. And that's what we learned on this. We learned, that's what's not funny. And because seriously, if they can't get a laugh with it, you have to go back to the drawing board. And these women were such pros. They were talking about their table reads. They were miraculous. When these women had those scripts in their hands and would read that material fresh on Monday morning, I get goosebumps thinking about it. It was just a phenomenal experience. And working with these women, professionals like, you've never, ever worked with, and I never worked with again. It was a beautiful experience. And it taught me everything I know about comedy writing.
Also, there was a great deal of trust that grew up between the writers and the actors and myself as a conduit between the two. And if something wasn't working on the stage, and I called up and said, this scene isn't working, you might want to look at it before run through, they didn't question, well, let us see it, which is what you usually hear, let us see it. Now they said, well, if you and the ladies can't make it work, we better start looking at it now. And that saved so much time, and that trust and that bond worked really well for us, I think. For
I only got one call once from Betty asking for a new line once. It wasn't even a new line. She goes, it was the mayor of St. Olaf. And she was like, in a real sweet, syrupy, hello, dear, it's Betty. Could I have a name for the mayor of St. Olaf? And I went, Handentil. Handentil. Mayor Hand... Well, she didn't like it either.
The thing I remember that was so extraordinary is that one time Mark Sotkin, this was in during the ill-fated spin-off Golden Palace, our boss, Mark Sotkin, went every once a year had an anniversary with his wife, and I remember, and he would leave early. That was his one night he would leave early. And so it was a tape night, and Mitch and my ex-writing partner Jamie and I were left in charge, which was just terrifying. And so we had a line in a scene that wasn't working, and I remember I went down and I had a couple of options for a joke. And I said to Betty, we could do this one or this one. What do you think? And Betty White said, oh, honey, that's your job. You decide. It don't work that way on my show.
Elaborate.
My actors are more than happy to tell me which line they would like. But I remember Betty, after all her experience and with all her fame and awards and stuff, she was more than happy to let the writers decide, and I appreciated it so much, and I've always remembered that.
I'd like to ask Susan a question, if it's apocryphal. That I believe before I joined in the first few shows, there was a show that wasn't working quite well, and you were getting on a plane to go to New York, and you wrote a scene on the plane and phoned it back in, and that became the cheesecake scene. Is that
cheesecake scene.
The first cheesecake scene, which is the same scene that we went and did at the Royal Variety Performance when we went over to
I
London.
did write a scene on a plane. I don't know if it was cheesecake, though.
No, it was the mirror.
Yeah, but it was all around the table
Was
with
it
the
the
cheesecake
mirror?
scene.
It was a cheesecake.
Yeah.
So
I
it came to
remember
call those cheesecake
the first show of the second season wasn't, and y'all were responsible, I'm so glad to say, it wasn't so funny as it needed to be.
I wrote that one.
Now, wait a minute. The one I'm talking about is when you came in and rewrote that second scene in the kitchen where we're talking about looking in the mirror.
That was the first season.
right.
That was the first season.
Oh, was that the first?
It was before I got there.
So it was the second show of the first season? Is that what it was?
Yes, I
Well,
believe it
we
was.
did that sketch when we went to England. We did that same sketch when, always on your back, Blanche, because if you ever look down this way, everything falls apart.
She wrote it in about an hour and called it in or turned it in or something, and we had a second scene that was hilarious. I remember it being that when
It was
maybe
very
wasn't.
easy. I had looked in a mirror.
We're spending a lot of time talking about jokes and how funny the series was and still is. But what really distinguished our cast and our writing as much as the jokes and being funny was the legitimacy and the honesty and the reality that they brought to almost every episode, and the juxtapositions of some very serious stuff that we did over the years with the kind of comedy that these ladies were capable of doing. Making those turns is really difficult, both for performers and for writers, and that really distinguishes the Golden Girls as much as anything.